What vaccines are there out there right now that are kind of on the coming up soon to be released?
For COVID specifically, right?
Yeah, correct. Not dengue.
It's a long list if we're
Yeah.
looking for all of them. Yeah. So you basically have the Oxford AstraZeneca one, which we talked about.
Mhm.
You have Pfizer partnered with BioNTech,
Mhm.
and that is the one that is really being looked at right now. The UK has already approved it. The FDA has released information on what they think about it and are going to be talking about it publicly tomorrow. And then Moderna's, which is, second place in the race currently, is very similar and is going to be reviewed by the FDA publicly on the 17th.
Got it. And what do you mean by reviewed publicly?
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing about this COVID test, and we've done a lot of this on my podcast. Is we've talked about the review of this data. So this data, differently from a lot of scientific data, is 100% public. So every paper that gets published is accessible to the public for free, and so we can actually, as scientists, without paying anybody to get the papers or anything like that, we can actually go through this data and look at it and see what we think of it. And that includes all of the vaccines so far for COVID. So what they're doing with this is the FDA is trying to be transparent as well.
Right.
And so they've released this 53-page document of all of their findings, allowing the public to take a look at it, including public scientists like myself. If they have questions, tomorrow there is a 8-hour I don't know if I should say tomorrow.
What's it? Yeah, okay. So it's going to be out Thursday the 10th?
Yeah, so it is tomorrow.
It is tomorrow while we're filming this. So Thursday the 10th, if I manage to get this edited soon enough, yay. Actually, yeah, go watch it right now. But probably it'll be yesterday, but I'm sure they'll be able to look those up on C-SPAN. And then the following, and which one is that's going to be reviewed on Thursday the 10th?
Yeah, so that is the Pfizer vaccine.
And then the Moderna is...
I'm sure the video will be recorded. If you
Sure.
are interested in it, you can go back and watch, the public sort of discussion of the FDA's review of that vaccine.
And then there's the Moderna that's coming out the next week. Is that also the Thursday after this one? So what, the 17th?
The 17th, yeah.
And that's doing the same process, but with the next one. So this video will be out by then, if y'all are curious.
Yeah, so that one has a similar makeup. So the interesting thing about vaccines is we have different ways to sort of stimulate the immune system with these vaccines. And both Moderna and Pfizer are actually using a novel concept of mRNA delivery that can stimulate the immune system differently than what we've been doing in the past.
I mean, so this sounds like something that if you go into it, I can make I was going to say nice cartoon, but functional illustration at least, or I'll just get confused and I'll throw the whole thing out. But how does that differ? What is the mechanism through which this is working?
Sorry. With historical vaccines, what we've done a lot of times is take a virus, make sure it's inactive so that it can no longer infect the cell, and then present that to the immune system. It looks exactly like the virus would, but it's not infective, so the immune system learns to recognize it. It's kind of like CCTV, right? If you have a robber that's caught on CCTV, the cops can show up, find out who the robber is, and buy the video, then track that person down, find their address, and then arrest them. Whereas if the person is immunized, instead the CCTV just immediately calls the cops and tells them this person's phone number, name, serial number, how tall they are, and whether they're, I don't know. I've got nothing else there. But so essentially what you're doing is you're stimulating that immune system to be able to respond much more quickly. Yeah. And the way we used to do that is through these killed viruses or something that looks kind of like the virus. In this new case, what we've done is we're taking a small protein that's a part of the virus. We're getting a cell to produce it for a brief amount of time.
Okay.
And then it shows up in the body. The immune system recognizes that. And then if that protein ever shows up again, the immune system can respond very quickly. And it's different, but.
So, I mean, one of the things that I've heard, I haven't put my sanity at risk as much as I could have by diving into the anti-vacc movement too deeply. But one of the things that I have managed to hear, even at the level that I've looked into it, is that, oh, do you really want to put a deactivated virus into your body? How do you know it's deactivated? You're just infecting yourself. And you're saying that this isn't even doing that. It's just taking a functional part to say, hey, body, here's this thing you should look out for. It's like training in virtual reality or something. So then when you see this thing, but it can't actually even do anything on its own because it's not the whole part.
Right. Right. And the way we're doing that is, and that's sort of the interesting thing. A lot of people are concerned, I think, about the introduction of genetic material. But essentially what you're introducing is an RNA that has no capability of getting into the nucleus and has no capability of integrating into your DNA. All it's going to do is, they have these things from high school biology called ribosomes. They're just this ball, essentially, that's going to translate RNA into protein, right? And so all this does is get into the cell, run through the ribosomes a few times, and then disappear. It just breaks down, just like any other messenger RNA. So you've got this brief time that you produce this protein that you want, and then it breaks down and disappears.
Got it. So it lacks all the mechanisms by which a virus would actually attack a cell.
Yeah.
Got it. So essentially, you're telling the cell to play act for a little bit, and it will then recognize a situation in the future, but it's not actually becoming a thing, and there's in fact no way for it to do that.
Yeah, it's impossible. You know, it doesn't have the genetic material required.
Got it. So how do you get side effects then?
Yeah, so side effects are sort of an interesting thing. And if you look at the data that is in this 53-page document, you know, you'll see that adverse effects exist in both the placebo group and the test group. And part of that is because some of the adverse effects are related to the placebo effect. You got injected into your arm with something, and that makes your arm hurt, right? So a decent amount of adverse effects are associated with the injection site soreness, injection site pain, right? And that happens in both groups. All you're looking for is it significantly worse in one group than the other? Because if it is, then it's more than just, the thought process that says, hey, I got injected, my arm should hurt, right?
Or if you're looking for a headache, you find a headache.
Right. Yeah. Or a headache. Right. So, and those are all self-reported, right? And
Sure.
so the other thing is some people are more susceptible to headaches than others. And so again, you're comparing the general population that got a placebo to those who were actually given the vaccine. Is there, higher instance of people who are like, yeah, my head hurts. And what you'll find in this case is there do seem to be higher instances of things like headache and some slight fever and things like that. But that's because you are stimulating the immune system. So one thing some people don't realize is that a bacteria, a virus, does not cause you to get a fever. You do not have a fever because you have the bacteria. You have a fever because you're fighting off the bacteria. That is an immune response mechanism. And so some of these adverse events, some of these things that you're looking at are the immune response that you're producing.
So a fever is not the broken window, a fever is the alarm going off.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. That's a great way to put it.
So one of the things I do here is Granted, I've heard a lot of stuff from a lot of people who don't know what the hell they're talking about. So there is a lot of bubbles being created around this for echo chambers. But one of the things that is echoing around those chambers is talk of some of the quote severe side effects that have happened in some of these trials so far. Have we seen any of that you think is at all attributable to any safety concern about these vaccines?
The only thing I've seen that's particularly interesting was the Pfizer finding once they started injecting or immunizing the community, was that 2 people actually did have an allergic reaction. And while that's not a concern, if allergic reactions can occur, it was surprising. It wasn't something that was seen in the test or in the phase trial. Yeah. And I think a large part of that is because this was associated with people who already have severe allergic reactions regularly. There are just some people who have an immune imbalance that causes hypersensitivity to virtually anything. And so in the rare case where those types of people exist, there can be concern.
Do you have any concerns about the prevalence rate of that, or do you think that is something that it will be limited to a very small section of the population? And what is a very small section of the population?
Well, we know that, in the trials, 40,000 people, over 40,000 people were injected, and this hadn't been seen.
Got it.
Right. And it wasn't until large scale distribution that we've now seen 2. And so I think, if you assume how many people can be injected in the 2 days it's been since the UK approved it, they started heavily distributing it very quickly, I'm sure. And so, you're talking about a large number of people, and so far you've seen it twice. So I think that we can reasonably assume that 1 in tens of thousands is a pretty rare scenario. And this is a very, very treatable condition. These people are fine. Allergic reaction is something we very, very well understand. EpiPens have been a thing for a long, long time.
One of the other things I hear about why people don't want to take this, and this is a phenomenon. I was looking the other day, and it was like 44% of firefighters in this fairly large district said that they wouldn't take it. And I'll have to put actual numbers on the screen because I'm just winging it on that one. But the link to the real article and the actual numbers will appear on the screen now. They're worried about long-term effects. This was a rushed process. This hasn't been tested enough that we don't know what the long-term effects of these vaccines are. How much credibility will you give to that critique?
Well, it's hard not to look at that. Vaccines in general, 2 to 3 year follow-up data is not only common, it's expected. So vaccines don't usually get approved without that sort of long-term data. And so we're living in a different world with this, right? We don't have 2 to 3 years to wait for follow-up data. And so we have to make some concessions with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at, how did it look, or how has previous vaccine studies, how have they looked on, at the early stages? How have they looked when they went on to not, do well in year 2 and year 3? How have they looked when they did look good in year 2 and year 3? And we need to be as close to that year 1, or that once they did make it past year 2 and year 3, we need to be as close to that as possible.
So I always try to analogy and metaphor can always be suspect, but trying to make that more digestible. What you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I have a ball and I throw it 10,000 times and it basically goes to the same place every time, then I get another object that is not a tennis ball, the thing I've thrown 10,000 times, but it weighs about the same and it's round. And that should give me some confidence that if I throw it in the same way, it will probably go to the same place. Is that essentially what we're saying here?
Yeah, and that's the target you're trying to hit, right? But at the same time, there is, absolute credence to the idea of not having the long-term data. But when we look at the argument of rushing it, I don't think that people are understanding that the way that they should.
So let's talk about that, because they're doing something quickly versus doing something in a rushed manner might not be the same thing. And so how did this vaccine get developed so quickly, if not by cutting corners?
Yeah, so I think that's an absolutely great question. And I really hope people start to understand this better, because the FDA itself is not a well-funded organization.
Especially
if you
recently.
walk into a government organization, do you expect to get rapid turnaround? When's the last time you went into the DMV and just walked in and 5 minutes later had your driver's license? The FDA normally receives a document from somebody that they need to review. And you have to interact with these agencies a lot throughout the development of this. Every time you give the FDA a document, you can expect 3 to 6 months before you're going to get a response from them. 3 to 6 months. And in some cases, you can't move forward until you've gotten a response. That doesn't happen here. The moment, some person is working at their desk in the FDA and someone says, hey, I need you to review this document for COVID, they put it right on top of what they were doing, and they stand there and watch them till it's done.
It's a relay where no one's just sitting there waiting for the next person to take the baton. They're just like, I got it, let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that a similar, how much does gathering the populations to do these tests, how long does that add time to the trials as well? And is that where we picked up time in this case as well?
Yeah, and so a lot of times vaccine candidates are harder to find in these types of scenarios, because one of the things you need to be in is a vulnerable population. And so in this case, you might have for like a norovirus vaccine, some people, a good candidate group is a military base. And so you need to get approval into a military base, do all your vaccines. And then if a breakout doesn't happen, you don't get any data. The same thing when you go into a dengue endemic country and you try to
test efficacy,
do a clinical trial there. If you don't get an outbreak, you get no data. Well, that's not a problem that we have with COVID, right? We can go into anywhere in the world, and tomorrow we probably have an outbreak in that area.
And probably we brought some with us. Especially if you're coming from here. Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. Are there other factors that slow down the typical process that aren't present here? And this might be a transition point. I'm not sure how it affects the timeline of development of a vaccine, but it does relate to another thing I've heard, which is the companies are just out to make money. I don't want to be a part of what I feel is essentially a giant field test of this vaccine that's going to pay these people billions of dollars, and they don't give a shit about me.
Yeah. So, and I get that, and it's an understandable concern. It's also baseless. So what's making this vaccine trial go so quickly is exactly that. It's because funding a vaccine is very, very expensive because they're a money sink. That's why you have people like Bill Gates spending millions of dollars on vaccines, is because that money doesn't come from anywhere else. It is, once you've developed a vaccine, it's very, very rare for you to make money on it. They are a money sink.
You crushed your profit. I mean, that's the issue with for-profit medicine. One of the things is there's no motivation to cure anything, because you'd rather lend somebody money and have them have to pay it back with interest than them come the next day and say, well, here's all your money back. Well, crap, I only made $5 on that.
So I would love for you to listen to my episode on the big pharma concept on that, because while that is in essence true, it actually doesn't work out, because the innovation of medicine doesn't come from big pharma. So sure, they don't have any incentive, but they're not the ones actually innovating and creating new medicines. So the rush to cure actually comes from the fact that innovation is funded in academia.
By whom? Well, I'll tell you what. Your episode link will appear here, and we'll all go watch it together, everyone.
It is super interesting. I'd love to hear what you think about it.
Well, one of the things that I'm looking at too is I know that one of the early rollouts and a place that will get the vaccine first is in Europe because they put up the money to develop the vaccine, which, I mean, if you want any correlation between, at the very least correlation between funding this on the front end as not a money-making thing and having that shorten the time span, there you go. So this won't be a money maker for the drug companies, you think?
No, it will be virtually free for everybody, and this virus is not likely, well, I shouldn't say that. I don't know that, but it could very well,
stick around. I wanted to talk about that in a minute, but yeah.
Yeah. So we can ignore that, cut that part out or whatever. But no, it will virtually be free for, the world population. It would be a crime against humanity for any country to try and make tons of money on this, and would be decried throughout the global scale.
Yeah, I don't think that that's a secret that would stay secret super long. And I mean, even if you're a company, multi-billion-dollar company like Pfizer or Bayer or whomever, that if you pull that off, someone's going to find out, and you're going to have a billion people knocking at your door. It's not going to go super well. So what they're getting out of this is some tax money, I'm sure, and then goodwill. They get to be the hero. Got it. How effective are these vaccines?
This is where we're in a crazy space. So what we've seen so far, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine says probably about 70% effective, and that is fantastic. The FDA was looking for hopefully 50% effective, and that would be good for vaccines. When we look at the Moderna and Pfizer data, it's in the above 90%. And I've now looked at the numbers myself, and it calculates exactly that. They are above 90%. It means that if you have two groups of people, one set has been vaccinated, another has not, and you see 100 cases of COVID, 95 of them, 90+% are in the non-vaccinated group, and 5% or 10% are in the in the vaccinated group.
So 90+% of the people who receive this vaccine have the immune response that protects them in the way that is expected and hoped for. Not quite. Okay.
So that's not the way to look at it. And it is a tough statistical measurement.
Because I think that's how people understand. Okay.
The way you look at these is 90% of the people who get the disease are now those who aren't vaccinated.
Interesting. I'm trying to wrap my brain about how you even test that, but okay. Because I don't think that people know that.
You're gonna test thousands of people, and then you wait until you have 100 cases of the virus, right? Oh. Positive cases, and then you look what group is each one of them in.
Okay. So can we get to a statistic the other way? Because I think that's easier for people to understand. I think when people say, here, 90% effective, they go, great, if I take this, there's a 90% chance I'm not going to get the virus.
And yes, that is the way to look at it. It's a hard sort of statistical comparison to make. And this is where my mantra on the podcast is science is squishy. You need to embrace the squishy, which is that A scientist does not like to say, here is exactly what you're looking at. Here's exactly what it says. That's just not how scientists tend to talk. They say, maybe it looks like this. This is statistically significant.
Those of us in the legal community, thank you, by the way, because I can put any scientific expert on the stand and say, look at the O.J. Simpson trial. People were not familiar with DNA testing back then as well. And you had somebody, a DNA expert, up on the stand, and they were asked, is it possible that the DNA found at this site that matches Mr. Simpson could have come from somebody else? And I think it was like a 1 in 12 billion chance or something. So instead of saying, yes, but you'd have to go to another galaxy and find another Earth to make that happen, they had to say, I can't rule it out.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So, and that's exactly what it is, right? So scientists just can't say 100% because until an event happens, you don't know that it'll happen in science.
Yeah.
When you drop the pencil, you don't know it's going to fall to the floor until it falls to the floor.
Right. And in fact, you're trained to wait to look. You talked about the efficacy of these vaccines being super high. Is that surprising to you?
Very surprising. Yeah. I think the whole scientific community would agree that nobody saw these numbers coming.
Is anyone alarmed by that? Did somebody overplay? Like, is this throwing an election where they went, oh, look, 130% of people showed up?
No, I think that what we're looking at is the progression of the understanding of vaccinology, virology, the ability to produce a new technology that actually works significantly better than, what we've done in the past and is, safer. And it's because we understand these things in a way that we just didn't really before.
I've heard of people getting COVID twice. Is it a question of I'm now protected forever, or is it a question of mass rollout so that we provide herd immunity, which we'll get to in a second, for enough people that we can kind of beat this virus down? Or is this a one and done? Or two and done?
This is actually another really interesting statistic that came out of the findings from Pfizer. So when we look at this data, they had a small amount of the people that were enrolled that had already had COVID. It wasn't enough to make statistical inferences, but it was enough for them to find out that of the small amount of people that did have COVID previously and then got vaccinated, some still did get the virus again during the trial. And more of those were in the group that was not vaccinated, which may indicate, and we cannot say this for sure, but it may indicate that the vaccine is more effective than natural immunity or than naturally occurring immunity.
I don't know enough about epidemiology and virology, and I know that isn't necessarily your field, but how concerned should we be? I hate asking that question. How afraid should you be about this coming back like the influenza year after year?
So I may not be an epidemiologist by trade, but I am, could be considered a virologist. I had, several years in the vaccine field.
I'll shut up. Glad you're here.
So I would say that there is obviously concern. One of the things that we can compare this to is things like the common cold, where you do get regular mutation, but what we've seen is so far a similar virus throughout this entire outbreak. Now, the problem is that if we continue to have more and more people get infected,
right,
we continue to have a higher chance of mutation. And we talked about that on the podcast as well.
Yeah.
But the biggest concern right now is that if it enters the population of other organisms, that can cause more mutation. And as in Denmark, where they had to cull the entire mink population.
Well, and how many people do you know who raise and harvest mink? I don't know any.
The entire population of Denmark, apparently, it's 1% of their GDP.
Yeah, no, it wasn't quite, but I think it's like 0.0. Anyway, that was a bold move, by the way. Good job, Denmark. That was some swift action. But the point that I'm trying to back up your point there about a zoological jump being, you know, even if that's an unlikely event, it's not likely it can't happen unless it has the exposure. So it took somebody who was a mink farmer getting coronavirus and bringing it to the mink for that to even happen. And if there's not a lot of people in the world who farm mink, if we can contain this thing, that certainly will limit the ability of the virus to do that. Is there any way? So I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say, barring anything super surprising in the findings in the next tomorrow and in the next week, that you feel fairly comfortable getting this vaccine, one of the vaccines.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I do want to stress that, you know, scientists, anytime a scientist says that they're willing to do something like this, you know, you have to remember that they're not making money off of this vaccine. You know, they're not a part of the business who is making that vaccine specifically, right? We are a part of the same community as everybody else. You know, we're just, you know, we have the experience to look at the data specifically, and we're just as skeptical as everybody else. You know, I came into this, if you listen to my early episodes of the coronavirus conversation, you know, we were very explicit about the fact that if the data was not done right, cue the Russian vaccine, we would never take it, right?
What about talk to me about the Russian vaccine. What do you mean?
Yeah, so let's talk about Sputnik. You know, that's what they call the Russian vaccine. And they published their data very, very early without ever stating that there would be a protocol, without ever doing a phased trial of said protocol. And then all of a sudden they said, hey, we have data, check it out. And they published it in the Lancet, and very prestigious journal.
Yeah.
And, you know, because it is COVID, it meant that scientists in the public had the ability to take a look. So if you were to go into your local middle school and ask every kid, you know, what is their favorite food, you're going to get a lot of tacos, pizza, burgers. And the total number of kids that says that is going to give you some list of numbers. If you then go to the next middle school, you're going to get similar numbers. You're going to get similar statements, but those numbers are going to be just a little bit different. Well, if you look at the data for the Russian vaccine, those numbers aren't a little bit different.
Wow.
You see graphs in which somehow their numbers line up exactly. And it's, you know, we talk about the 1 in 12 billion chance where you'd have to go to another galaxy to find another O.J. Simpson. That's the chance of that happening that we're looking at.
They found a whole school of them, huh?
Yeah.
What you're essentially saying here now, judging by some of the stuff that I've seen about the election results and that, you know, coming out of Wisconsin or wherever it was, where like they caught that computer error is what it ended up being, the reporting error for Biden of however many thousand votes that made the graph go boink, and everyone was just, by everyone I mean people who were concentrating on that, they were on that so quick. So probably if there are problems with this 50 pages of data, we've got, you know, really motivated, uneducated, but motivated people that'll find these anomalies, as well as, you know, everyone else on the planet.
And I'm not the only one who read this entire document that is a scientist, you know, that is a concerned scientist. There are a lot of people, you know, as you say, scientists that are looking closely at these data points, you know.
Right. What happened to that vaccine? Where is it now? Or was that just like, yeah, never mind, we're just gonna, oh, sorry.
No, so that's the best part. So this is actually not an uncommon scenario. Sometimes a scientist copy and pasted the wrong thing, right? So what you do to fix that is these concerned scientists sent a letter to the Lancet and they said, hey, please publish the raw data so that we can, refute this, or we can fix this issue. And so the Lancet got a hold of the Russian scientists and said, hey, this is a concern. Can you publish the raw data? And this was the response.
That was the raw data.
So all essentially what they said was the data looks good, or the data is good.
Data's fine. Stop asking questions. You'll go commit suicide by jumping out a window and shooting yourself in the face twice.
It was an easy answer that they refused to provide.
Yeah, got it, which is suspicious. What would you tell people who are on the fence, who are concerned? How would you assuage their fears, and what would you do? What would you say to try to convince them to take it if that was a goal that you have?
I think the important factor is, not only would I take it, I will take it. And it's because of the importance of establishing herd immunity. And I know that this word or this phrase got tossed around a ton in the last year, and it's very, very misunderstood. When people talk about herd immunity, they think if we have 10 people in a room and one of those people has cystic fibrosis, let's all go get the disease and that cystic fibrosis person can die. And now we have herd immunity. And that's not how it works. Herd immunity would instead say, let's take those 9 people out of that scenario, have them exposed to the virus, and then they can surround the cystic fibrosis person. And now that person has nowhere to get the virus from.
If I have some medical reason that not to take a vaccine, and I'm not looking at everyone in Oregon with their I don't want to medical reason. This will make me allergic, or I don't know, some other legitimate reason.
Immunosuppressed people is probably the best person you can list. A person who doesn't have the ability to develop that immune response is the person who can't take that vaccine and they can't get the virus. So by getting the vaccine, you protect them by them not having a source to get it from.
So they can't take the vaccine, so you have to. Because they can't protect themselves. So the only way to do it is for you to not have the vaccine. As opposed to, this has been one of the annoying things about COVID and 2020 in a lot of ways, that it's really laid bare some of the selfishness in a lot of people and the ways that that's developed. Take mask wearing, for example. The basic clinical physics about wearing a mask is that it better protects. If you are an asymptomatic case of SARS-2 or the coronavirus, and you're wearing a mask, it will protect other people from you infecting them more than them wearing a mask will. So the idea of making this a personal responsibility issue where everyone can just look out for themselves, even from the mask level, doesn't work, because I can wear a mask all day long and it will only offer me a small fraction of the percentage of the protection that it would be, even if I don't have the virus, than if an infected person were wearing theirs.
Yeah.
I can't protect myself to the same level that they can protect me from them. We've heard herd immunity in Sweden, I think was the big one. Did that work? Are they still doing that?
I feel like, again, I would direct you to my podcast, but
I'm setting you up.
No, it did go very poorly, and if you look at the numbers, a large percentage of their population of nursing within the nursing home died. And so, a lot of people don't have grandparents anymore in that country.
Because they just decided to do nothing. How does doing nothing contribute to herd immunity?
So the idea there was they had this skewed sense of herd immunity that I described earlier, which is just, let's everybody get the virus, the vulnerable population will die, and then it'll be over.
So how much of a population has to have immunity to provide protection for those who can't get that immunity?
So it depends on the virus, and there's a lot of numbers that go into determining what that percentage needs to be, but it changes. So if you look at measles, which is a highly contagious virus, something like 95% of the community needs to be immune to ensure that there's no spread, which is why we saw an uptick in certain places after the movement started by
Oregon.
a monster known as Andrew Wakefield.
Yeah.
But in some cases, polio, for instance, it's 80%, right? So it's different depending on the virus itself. It's called the RO value. Essentially, it's calculated by the number of people that any one person who has the virus can infect. And then it's also associated with, that's the main part of the calculation, but it also includes the amount of people that receive antibodies from their mother, also the number of people who, get the, exposure any other way. So all of these types of things go into the calculation, but the main value is that RO value, which is based on how many people can one person tend to infect.
Or that's the R naught, right?
R naught,
yeah. So I know that the R naught is correct me if I'm wrong, it's how many people an infected person is expected to infect. I've heard the R naught was different in Germany than it was in Malawi, but it's just, you're talking about the effective R naught.
And that would probably, those calculations possibly could have been different, because we still right now don't have an entirely accurate 100% R naught value for this virus, because we don't know enough about asymptomatic people, and we just don't have enough people tested to truly nail down everything about this virus.
So if the vaccine turns out to be safe, and you'll know if it's not, people in the world, you should get it, because the other only way to get herd immunity is essentially that everybody gets the virus, and the at-risk population that is protected by everyone getting the virus are whoever's left. Got it. Which is not protecting anyone. I mean, so I was thinking of an analogy for that. I did listen to your podcast about herd immunity, and what I was thinking of was an actual herd. If you have a bunch of gazelles and there's a hungry lion, the gazelle that is less able to run or whatever is the most vulnerable to that lion. And that herd can line up and surround that individual and protect that person, that individual, that herd member from the lion, or they can let the lion eat it. And then that lion's not hungry, which technically makes the herd immune. But that's not what we're talking about. Right.
Yeah, that's survival of the fittest.
Yeah, that's just nature, the way things work. But
it's not a bad thing to sort of end on, to talk about that, or even, start on, where basically you have a particular understanding of this virus because you've been affected by it personally.
Well, so in talking about that a little bit, we talked about mask wearing and protecting vulnerable populations. And, I know that you know this, but my mom wasn't necessarily in a vulnerable population, though she was 71. And the fatality rate of this virus is extremely low, depending. But the older you are, it rapidly increases, hundreds and hundreds of times. And for some medical and family reasons, she had to travel, and had to travel through states where there were no mask mandates, and people are not paying attention to the public health guidelines, and they have some of the highest infectivity rates in the country. And unfortunately, my mom contracted coronavirus and died. So if people out there in the world, this is still a nebulous concept to you, because you don't know anyone who this has affected, granted you don't know me, but you're looking at me. I am a person who lost a family member to this. So if you're saying this is inconvenient or I don't want to take this because I don't know enough about, I have unanswered questions, or I don't know enough about vaccines to be comfortable taking this, I hope that can help motivate you. That if your grandma and grandpa is not still living, if your parents aren't still alive, your friends are. And this is not a nebulous concept to some of us. The people that you're going to protect and the people who are going to be protected by others getting this might be very important to you. So if that helps you get your questions answered, if you still have questions and are uncomfortable about this product, do the research. As I was listening to on your podcast, somebody made a great point about the difference between skepticism and sort of negative, fragile worldview certainty. I have this opinion that this is something that I don't want to do, or I don't trust, or I know more than this thing and nothing can convince me. But oftentimes we hear people who take those positions defend those positions by saying, well, look at the data. So I would encourage anyone to look at the data. And if you don't understand the data, give me a call. Give Danny her a call. Find somebody who does understand it and find somebody you trust who understands it to explain it to you. Explore these things. Be a skeptic. Ask good questions. That's what this entire channel is about. But then follow the answers. So if you need motivation to do that work, just think of your mom. On that note.
One of the things I do want to add is, one of the things that we want to do on the podcast is provide an outlet for understanding of science. I think that the community can understand science better than scientists are allowing them to do. If they just get science from people who aren't journalists, who aren't, people with a bias agenda directly from the pharmaceutical companies themselves, and instead get it from a group of scientists who have no, financial basis for even doing what they're doing. All they're doing it for is healthy scientific skepticism.
Go ask your local chemistry teacher.
That's what the podcast is for.
Yeah. You're trying to humanize or break down the divide between the expert and the layman. And I think that's a good idea. I think that there seems to be this us versus them mentality in so much of our lives these days. But really the difference between an expert or a scientist and someone who's trained in a discipline is the training. They're not they're not otherworldly. They're not another human. They don't sacrifice their empathy or compassion or feelings, or they don't have to pay that up front to become this thing. They've just put in some work. I'm sure that you all still care about the same things. So, and thank you for being willing to help. I've learned a lot from your podcast. I heartily will recommend it to anyone. There are some great episodes on this topic. And so if you are one of those people who doesn't know a lot about this stuff, including myself, I watched them to brush up on this, and I learned so much. I highly recommend Danny's podcast here. Should I call you Danny? I don't know.
No, that's fine.
Mr. Cox, his podcast, I'm hoping to work with you again. You've done some really amazing research on 3D printing and bioethics and bioengineering stuff. And I really want to get into that later on for happier times and happier topics. But I think this is a really important thing to talk about. So do you have anything else?
I don't think so. I think, I think mention the podcast a couple of times, but I tried not to just be like, listen to my podcast.
Dude, don't worry. I will plaster this all. I want to drive people to your podcast from this. So I'm just going to thank you real quick. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to come out and talk to me. And I know your class got out late, so again, I really appreciate it. And when is this episode? You have an episode coming out about these vaccines, I believe.
Yeah. So the most recent update that we've done will air, or it will post on, what is this, Wednesday? So 4 days from now.
Well, tomorrow's the 10th, so yeah. Sunday the 13th, I believe.
No, 12th. 13th?
Isn't Thursday the 10th? We'll edit all this out.
Hold on. 13th. Okay. So yeah, the most recent update we've done to this COVID vaccine information will come out on the 13th. But there's still some time to get caught up on the others that in the series reaching or up to
have to do with this space. So you've got one on herd immunity. You've got one. What other ones that are relevant?
We actually started, one of the first ones was the hydroxychloroquine argument, and not as relevant anymore. But the masks, 6 feet in COVID-19, herd immunity, and then we've got 2, I think, at this point on the vaccines themselves as they've progressed through the trials.
Who's on those that podcast with you? It's yourself with your background, and who else?
And, we try to take the standard sort of curious mind and bring them in, and we've done that by bringing in a good friend of mine that used to be my physical trainer in the gym. His name is Shanti, and brilliant mind, but doesn't have classical training as a scientist, and he just does a great job asking questions, and and then we bring in several experts that I have a personal connection with a lot of them, and we talk specifically to them so that I can help sometimes bridge the gap between Shanti and the experts, and be able to sort of be that go-between for some of the doctors that we've had on, and help make some of this make a little more sense.
Well, it sounds like you have a wide representation for the things that you're tackling. So I've thoroughly enjoyed it so far. I'm looking forward to listening to more. Again, this should be out. If you're watching this, you should be watching it on Thursday or Friday. And if you're watching it later on, go get it. It's already out. But otherwise, your next episode comes out on Sunday the 13th, and we're looking forward to it. That the data on these trials comes out. One comes out tomorrow, and one's next week. So I'll put links in the description to either where you can find those videos or where you can watch, depending on, again, where you're watching this in time. Thank you so much for being with me again, and I really look forward to working with you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I mean, I think your video series has been absolutely incredible. You do really, really great research into topics that you're don't have specific training in either, but you do an incredible job of the research itself, and really finding information that is not only valuable but relevant.
It means a lot coming from you, man. So thanks a lot. We'll catch you next time, and thanks for watching, y'all.